I'm known on the street as Notorious BRS. I'd like to talk and use my 10 minutes to deal with legacy and the visionaries. Our park has been created around one of those visionaries, Henry Kaiser. There was a time during the Second World War when there were 14 shipbuilding enterprises that circled the bay. In Richmond, there were 4 of those, all by Henry Kaiser, a man who had never built a ship, but who came into Richmond in 1941, believing that if he used the mass production prefabrication techniques that Henry Ford was using in auto manufacturing, he could revolutionize shipbuilding. He had to go to the library how to do that. He had no idea. He came in here as a cement contractor. He knew that all he needed was enough hands, and nothing I ever read about him would have convinced me that he was a social reformer. No, he was just a smart industrialist. He knew that all he needed was enough hands, and he didn't care what color they were. He didn't care who they were attached to. He just needed enough hands. He knew where the greatest pool of available in the nation lay, and that was in the 5 southern states of Mississippi, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana. And he had the audacity to bring in a workforce for his 4 Kaiser shipyards of 98,000 black and white Southerners who weren't going to be sharing drinking fountains for another 20 years back in their places of origin. Inadvertently, he imported the entire system of racial segregation out of the South into the Bay Area with no time for focus groups and diversity training. They had to negotiate every single day as it came, negotiate it at the individual level, and is that which accelerated the rate of change to such an extent that to this day, it still radiates out of the Bay Area into the rest of the nation. And that's enough to build a park around. They're all living under the common threat of fascist world domination. And under that totally flawed social system in existence at the time, they worked around the clock for 3 shifts a day, for 364 days, only with Christmas off. And right here, brought into existence, launched 747 ships in 3 years and 8 months. And by so doing, helped to turn the force of the war around right here by outproducing the enemy. So much for your visionaries. But the legacy that he left with us was that acceleration of social change, which we benefit by to this day. Now, we 4 years ago, did something that to this day we're still crying over. Only 39% of us turned out at the polls in the national election, which probably was predicted that we would have a 40% turnout in this last election, in which we elected a president for less than 25% of that vote. It is necessary that each generation recreate democracy in its time. We have that legacy of social change here in the area. And those are national figures. But in California, we had an electoral turnout of 75%. In Washington State, we had a legacy. We had a turnout of 79%. And I like to think of that as the Kaiser legacy, because we are still leading the nation in social change. Now, in 1942, we did meet that change. We did it under that flawed social system, but our children and our grandchildren are now facing a new challenge, that of rising sea levels, climate warming, rising sea levels and climate change. And they're going to have to match and exceed that great mobilization that we experienced in 1942. A mobilization that was equal to the building of the pyramids or the Great Wall of China. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's great arsenal of democracy. And we did that, and we met that under a totally flawed social system. And our kids are going to have to meet their challenge of their times with a still flawed social system. Because the nature of democracy is it will not ever stay fixed. It wasn't intended to. Every generation has to recreate it in its time, or it will die. Now, fortunately for all of us, we've created this incredible system of national parks where it's possible for these children, the children who are served by NatureBridge, to revisit almost any era in our history. The heroic places, the contemplative places, the scenic wonders, the shameful places, and the painful places, in order to own that history, own it, process it, because I don't think that we have actually ever processed the Civil War. Process it in order to begin to forgive ourselves, that we may move together into a more compassionate future, and that's the legacy that the National Park Service and NatureBridge promises to our young people. So thank you very much for inviting me here, and I'd like to invite, where are you? All right, we have Dylan, Lou. Thank you. And between Dylan and myself, who carries a picture around in her wallet of my slave great-grandmother, born in 1846 and died in 1948 when I was 27 years old. I knew my slave ancestor. Between that generation and Dylan's, there is a tremendous amount of progress that has been made, and he is probably the prize. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And then would you mind giving him his backpack? This is his award for Student of the Year. You can just hand it to him and take
Can
photos.
you say that?
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you, Ms. Soskin. That was such an inspiring speech. So I'm so honored to be here to be speaking on behalf of NatureBridge as this year's Student of the Year. And again, my name is Dylan, and I'm a second-year intern at the Teen Environmental Education Mentorship Program at the Golden Gate campus, spelled T-E-E-M, and it's not misspelled. There's two E's. So one thing you need to know about me is that I have a severe allergy to all nuts and peanuts. Everyone that knows me knows this. So when my manager, Carly, heard about this at the beginning of summer training, she used this as an opportunity for me to demonstrate how to administer an epinephrine injection. And you can all imagine how that went on the first day of summer training. So I was being bombarded with questions, and I have a few of them written down here. And here are some of them. What happens if you eat an almond? Or if I touch you with a peanut, will you have an allergic reaction? And one of my personal favorites, how fast will you die if you eat nuts? And although I was only talking to a handful of people my age, at the beginning of summer training, this was a really big moment for me in becoming more outspoken and confident in speaking in front of my peers. So fast forward to the beginning of the school year, where one of my main responsibilities was teaching children environmental concepts through interactive activities called eco-athletics. And although I wasn't the best teacher at first, I instantly fell in love with teaching eco-athletics. Now, my love with teaching stems back to 10 years ago when I was also a student in the Marin Headlands as an elementary school student. And this really made me realize how much of an impact that my lessons had on the children that I taught, seeing how much those lessons impacted me 10 years ago. And although I was very uncomfortable with teaching by myself and speaking in front of just a small group of kids, I knew that I had a very important job. So when I first joined team, I had always enjoyed spending time outdoors. But looking back, my concept of environmental education and my relationship with nature was very shallow. It was very surface level. And it was almost like nature was a friend that I knew and saw once in a while, but never really got to know. So one way that I fell in love with nature and how I grew my relationship with nature was through these national research studies called citizen science projects. And so for my first citizen science project at Team, I was asked to collect a certain number of dragonfly larvae from a nearby lagoon. And the single most fascinating part of this project was, one, seeing a bunch of organisms that I never knew existed under a microscope, but also learning about this lagoon. And it was fascinating because this lagoon was something that I passed by twice a week on my ride to campus, but I had never really thought about it. And so for a high school student accustomed to city living, this was really monumental for me. The lagoon, I learned, was so important in the environment and being interconnected with all the other organisms, big and small. And I think this same lesson applies to all the NatureBridge campuses, from Golden Gate to Olympus. It's the fact that NatureBridge does teach us to conserve water and to turn off the lights when we're not using them, but the most influential part of NatureBridge is how it changes how we view the world and how we go about our environment. And I think that's the most important thing for the next generation, is to find a sense of stewardship, a sense of community, and a sense of place in the community. So I'm proud to say that through NatureBridge, I've met some of the most caring and hospitable people that I know, most still being the strong, positive role models in my life today. So from my manager, Carly, to my past mentors and my fellow interns, we have all grown so much together in just these past 2 years. Whether it was trying to pitch a tent in the pouring rain, or tasting goat milk for the first time straight from the source. I think that we can all agree that we've grown to become part of the NatureBridge family. Now, NatureBridge has not only provided me the tools that I needed to become the person that I am today, but Team has also led me to pursue a career in environmental design and architecture. Team has affected the areas of my life that I least expected it to, and for that, I'm very grateful. So I'd like to end by thanking Team and NatureBridge for redefining environmental education in my life. Thank you.